Okay, I want to talk to you all today about reading comprehension. As we talked about in class, there is a difference between reading for entertainment and reading for comprehension. So what I want to do is I want to read a passage from your social studies book to give you an idea of what I call a think aloud. As I read this, I'm going to give you an insight as to what's going on in my mind. Scary thing up here. As you listen or follow along on page 87 in your social studies book, I'm going to share with you information about the colony of Georgia. In 1732, James Oglethorpe founded the colony of Georgia as a refuge for debtors. Now, when you are reading for comprehension, you stop at the end of a sentence and you make the connection. When I think about Georgia, Georgia is the southernmost colony of the 13 original colonies. I also know that the word refuge means a safe place, and I know a debtor is somebody who can't pay their bills. And so Mr. Oglethorpe founded Georgia as a safe place for those English people, later to be colonists, to go who could not pay their bills back in England. The English government wanted to use the colony as a military outpost against Spanish Florida to the south and French Louisiana to the west. Okay? When Mr. Oglethorpe came over and he settled this colony, he and the other English nobles wanted to make sure that Georgia was safe. Georgia was a good place to launch strikes against Spanish Florida. Obviously, it was its next door neighbor. And it was a good place to launch strikes against the French, who were also trying to gain land in America. So Mr. Oglethorpe said, no, no, no. We will use Georgia as a safe place, and we will launch military strikes against both Spain and France, hopefully kicking them out and keeping America, or at least Georgia, English. In 1739, during a war between England and Spain, the Spanish tried to force the English colonists out of Georgia, but they were unsuccessful. So Mr. Oglethorpe's attempt at keeping Georgia all English was a good one. England, Germany, Swiss, and Scottish colonists all settled in Georgia. All religions were welcome. And so I remember now that other colonies had certain religious limitations, if you will, preferences perhaps. I remember Maryland was a Catholic colony. I remember Pennsylvania was a Quaker colony. And I remember that Massachusetts was a colony where the Pilgrims and the Puritans were allowed to settle. So Georgia was a little bit different. As the colony's leader, Oglethorpe set strict rules that upset the colonists. Well, of course his rules upset the colonists. Keep in mind who most of the colonists were. Most of the colonists were people who couldn't pay their bills back in England. They probably weren't real good at following rules. Mr. Oglethorpe didn't care. His rules were, you pay your bills, you do as I tell you. Now, the colonists weren't stupid people. They realized they had two choices. They could either listen to Mr. Oglethorpe, or they could be shipped back to England and back to the prisons. The king, in response to that unrest, made Georgia a royal colony in 1752. Now, the king making Georgia a royal colony means that I need to understand what a royal colony is in order to comprehend that. Royal means belongs to the king. Colony, place of settlement. So the settlement belonged to the king. But the king was clear across the ocean, so how could he keep track of what was going on in Georgia, which was clear over here in America? The king appointed a royal governor. Now, the royal governor was the king's eyes and the king's ears. The governor was the person who told the king what was going on in his royal colony. So the royal governor wasn't necessarily the most popular person in the world, because I guess you could say that he was spying on the people for the king. By the early 1700s, there were 13 English colonies along the eastern coast of North America. Eastern coast, that would be to the right-hand side, all the way up and down the Atlantic seaboard. So there you go. You heard my think aloud as I read the section on Georgia in your textbook, Chapter 3, Section 3, on page 87. When you read for comprehension, you really do stop at the end of every sentence or every idea and make a connection in your mind to something you already know, or visualize it as you see it happening in your textbook.